Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Bienvenidos al evento paralelo de la Red de Patrimonio Climático. Primero que nada, quiero agradecer a la Secretaría de Cultura de México, a UNESCO, por supuesto a la Red de Patrimonio Climático por haberme invitado a dar la bienvenida a este evento y especialmente a Andrew Potts y a Julián Polanco. Bueno, el día de hoy solamente quisiera mencionarles que yo como arquitecta, para mí la acción climática tiene que ver con la conservación de la arquitectura tradicional, una arquitectura tradicional que muchas veces es estigmatizada incluso desde los mismos gobiernos, las oficinas que se encargan del desarrollo del entorno construido. Entonces, como parte de mi saludo, solamente los invito a que tendamos nosotros como profesionales de la cultura y como comprometidos con la acción climática, tendamos estos lazos con las diferentes instancias de gobierno que se encargan de atender el entorno construido y que no permitamos más la estigmatización de la arquitectura tradicional y por tanto su destrucción, pues como sabemos, el edificio más resiliente es aquel que ya está construido. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Yolo. It is so inspiring to hear from our youth, see the world through their lens, help us to learn so that we can all make a resilient future together. Good afternoon. I'm Julianne Polanco, and I have the great honor of being California's State Historic Preservation Officer, working with more than 145 tribes and communities to ensure that cultural heritage is celebrated, commemorated, and considered in projects such as roads, solar panels, and parks. In all of this, the importance of partnership, raising voices to create power sharing frameworks for more holistic and therefore more sustainable outcomes is the foundation of our work and couldn't be more important. It's been an amazing week for culture as world leaders and experts gather to uplift the important role of culture, of living communities, the traditions of our past, those we make today, and our present and decision-making responsibilities to solve the many ills that challenge us in our communities throughout the world. While it is encouraging to see the references to climate change and the draft Mondiacult final declaration, the Climate Heritage Network believes that the text falls short of what is needed to face the climate emergency. This emergency and the threat it poses to the planet, its people, their cultures and heritage, calls for an ambitious vision of how cultural policy can help people imagine and realize a low carbon, just, resilient future and achieve climate resilient development. We continue to urge the culture ministers and all of us here today to do more to provide guidance, leadership, and decisions required to unlock the power of culture, arts, and heritage to enable transformative climate action. We stand ready to support, to collaborate with all parties. Responding to facing both a climate challenge and biodiversity crisis requires comprehensive treatment of climate change and cultural policies, and of culture and heritage in climate policy. Cultural heritage, people in their lifeways are at risk every day from these impacts. And at the same time, they're assets in climate action as well. Yet there remains little consensus as to the key goals of culture climate policy, targets, and how best to achieve them. We are all here, all positioned as culture bolsters us to meet this emergency head on, to scale action for communities as they imagine for themselves. Today, we have gathered thoughtful, smart, and engaged colleagues to advance the understanding of how cultural policies can best assist these global challenges to build consensus as priorities, empowering people to imagine this low carbon resilient future. This emphasizes strong linkages between sustainable development goals like poverty eradication, promotion of health and well-being, and keeping to the 1.5 degrees Celsius climate adaptation and mitigation pathways. Also addressed is the questions of what cultural policies will best help us meet these aims, taking into account that culture is both the cause of climate change and part of the response. to paraphrase Mel Mizanhi, who spoke earlier this week, she says, and I quote, "We do culture, we live culture, we are culture. We do not start at the top and reach down. Rather, solutions need to start at the bottom, on the ground, asking those living culture every minute, every day, to build upon those needs to create available tools to ensure this just, thriving, low carbon future for all. The legacy we leave is happening now. We must act with true meaning to create generations that can build upon to make the world a better place for each and every life we touch, for all every day." So let's begin. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our first panel, and the lead of that panel, Mario Santana. He is the Secretary General for ICOMOS, the International Conference of Monuments and Sites. Mario.
Voy a poner las diapositivas. Muy buenas tardes a todos y muchas gracias por venir a este evento. Voy a hablar en inglés por el resto de mi introducción porque lamentablemente tengo todas las diapositivas en inglés y algunas veces es difícil manejar la terminología en castellano y no quiero cometer un gran error. Pero antes de... To start, I would like to thank, Julian. I was just talking to her about, the initiative, and I was really happy to learn that this report that ICOMOS put together, the Working Group on Climate Change put together in 2019, is actually being developed in California and being adapted to their own needs and their problematic. And I think that this is probably one of the major impacts of this process that took about 5 years to put together. And I have, the privilege and the opportunity to explain you a little bit about it. I only have 5 minutes, so I'm not gonna take all the time. And I know we are just digesting lunch, so I'm not going to be very heavy. All right, so, sorry. There we go. So this effort was, many authors across ICOMOS contributed to this report, and here are some of the names. My name is there, but I have to say that I contribute mostly as a logistics support. At the time I was a board member, vice president, and now secretary general. And the report objectives has basically 6 elements. So the first one is to outline the intersection of climate change and cultural heritage, address both to heritage communities and to the climate scientists and policymakers, the creation of a new interdisciplinary climate heritage movement, and that I think came to production of the Climate Heritage Network, help establish a benchmark for heritage communities to measure their engagement, encourage climate change actors to increase their engagement with cultural heritage, and stimulate attention to research gaps and promote opportunities for collaboration. The report has basically 2 parts. The first part, remits of culture in climate action, is basically a heritage conservation in a climate change framework. And the second part talks about the impacts of climate change drivers on cultural heritage, catalogs the ways that climate change drivers are impacted in cultural heritage, and aspires to be a climate change conversation in a heritage framework. Also, it provides a glossary of terms that is very useful. I am actually a professor in Canada, in Carleton University, let's say my primary job. And we use this methodology often with our students that are dealing with the assessment of, sites, historic sites, and the relationship with conservation and climate adaptation. So the report has thematic essays, basically 6 themes, and I will mention this and then scroll through some of the parts. Cultural heritage in delivering climate resilient development pathways, heritage as a powerful climate action asset, integrating cultural heritage and climate science, the role of good conservation practice, equity and climate justice, and existing heritage tools and methodologies to engage that transdisciplinary and participatory processes. So here is just a brief view of some of the issues of part one. So in part one, we take actually the 2015 Paris Agreement, and we try to translate that in terms of the impact of cultural heritage. So here you see the climate action sectors, and then the sections of the Paris Agreement in which the sectors are derived. And then basically we take all these aspects and we go through them and analyze them from the standpoint of cultural heritage. So I will just scroll down through them. So I will meet my 5 minutes, okay? So we have adaptation, and then we have mitigation, we have loss and damage. And then in part two, we systematically catalog the impacts of climate change drivers on 5 cultural heritage typologies. And I will just show you a slide showing those 5, climate drivers. And what I will do now is just invite you to join ICOMOS if you are not a member. And if you're in Mexico, you can join ICOMOS Mexico or elsewhere in your national committees. And I would also invite you, if you are a member of an institution, to join the Climate Heritage Network. It's a very active network. And if you allow me, I would like to invite you for an upcoming webinar that will be held in February, and I will announce that later, because also as a set of education in climate adaptation, we have an initiative called Just Transitions. It's heritage education in climate adaptation. We had an event in June organized by Canadian universities, and we will have a follow-up event in February. So I invite you to that. And now we'll give the floor to Sarah. Oh, no. Oh. Hey, Sarah. Okay. All right.
Thank you very much. So I'm Sarah Vieux from the Committee on Culture of United Cities and Local Governments, UCLG. I will moderate this first panel, and I will start by briefly setting the scene and give an introduction, and then I will give the floor to my colleagues here on the stage. So it's been 40 years now since the first Mondiacult Global Conference declared in 1982 that the objective of human development was not production or consumption, but human well-being. Since then, since those 40 years, more than 50% of the all historical greenhouse gas and CO2 emissions have been released in only 40 years. So the question we need to ask ourselves is, where did we go wrong? 30 years have passed since the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, was launched at Rio Earth Summit to combat dangerous human interference with the climate system. And I'm doing this because I'm quoting. And let's face it, this human interference is not only, but it's deeply cultural also. So why are we still so far from this below 1.5 degrees Celsius promise that we adopted in Paris 7 years ago at COP21, knowing that keeping the average temperature below 1.5 degree or even 2 might just allow for less risky climate threat, which could allow humanity to keep developing in decent or acceptable way, but it does not even guarantee it. So what did we miss? Who is missing at the table of the discussion and of the decisions? Well, cultural and cultural actors, creative sectors are one key missing element from the conversation on climate change. We know it today, and we're advocating for it. In the last years, UCLG, together with the CHN, the Climate Heritage Network, and other key partners, we have been working and discussing this issue. And one key point is that it is becoming urgent and critical to recognize the cultural dimension of climate change and the fact that cultural policies, together with other public policies, including local ones, contribute to addressing the climate emergency. We need to do more, as Julian was saying before, we need to do more to provide the guidance, the leadership, and decisions required to unlock the potential power of culture from hearts to heritage, to enable real and effective transformative climate action. because arts and culture have this power, and even arts and culture are maybe uniquely positioned to tackle this fundamental dimension of our way to respond to climate change as one humanity, which is a question of mentalities and social imaginaries. We know that until we don't start changing our consumption and production patterns drastically, by reducing plastic, the use of modifying the use of fossil resources and energies and so on, we are heading directly to the wall. Culture has the power to enable this transformative change, which we need more than ever. Cultural actors, creative sectors, tangible and intangible heritage, knowledge, such as traditional knowledge of indigenous people, for example, and diversity are key to rethink the way we are living and the way we are relating to nature, to the planet, and to each other. Moreover, many studies and reports have been produced and make very clear that climate change is having catastrophic consequences on the preservation of both natural and cultural heritage. The loss of biodiversity, the destruction of our soils and oceans, the loss in quality of the air from one side, and on the other side, the loss and damage not only to tangible, but also on intangible heritage with the colonization of post-industrial fossil fuel-based practices in almost all regions of the world today. This is why back in March 2022, some months ago, the Climate Heritage Network, together with Europa Nostra and United Cities and Local Governments, UCLG, we joined together to coordinate a meeting entitled Cultural Infrastructures as Drivers of People-Centered Climate Action. It was part of the Resiliart, which was a global movement aiming at gathering inputs to inform the preparatory process of this Mondiacult global conference we are here today. This encounter gathered key actors on climate, culture, including decision makers, experts, academics, activists, and so on. And it explored how cultural infrastructures and narratives can be harnessed to drive a more effective climate action and climate policy making, including through people-centered approaches that tackle the socio-economic structures that are behind the climate and biodiversity crisis. This debate identified three major cultural gaps, policy gaps and needs that we will develop with our panelists today. The first one is about differentiating and auspicing toxic heritage, as we know that culture is both part of the problem and the response to climate change, as Julian was saying before. And it will be developed by my colleague here, Gabe. And the second point was, the second gap identified was nourishing arts for transformative change, in the sense that we need cultural policy to unlock artistic and imaginative tools to support transformative reinterpretation of today's carbonscape and make taste waste mindsets. That will be developed by Catherine here on the stage. And the third point that we identified was about strengthening the cultural right perspective, including, for example, worldviews of indigenous peoples and local communities who are not co-opted by prevailing notions of progress in order to enrich our ability to imagine systems not based on the exploitation of people and nature. And I will be developing this point later on. So I will give the floor now to Gabriel Caballero, focal point for the SDGs at ICOMOS, the International Council of Monuments and Sites.
Hello, everyone. For every one of you, magandang hapon po. That's good afternoon. And then I have this good opportunity to give you a different topic, which is called differentiating and hospicing toxic heritage. It's a new terminology, and I want to explain what that is. So toxic heritage is a term that I encountered from the research of Elizabeth Crider-Reed. And that research is from the Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. It defines that there's a legacy of harm from humans that we've created, and it includes the harm of oppression, of tragedies and violence, and it's sometimes called dark heritage. but it's also referring to the material harm that is left in toxic residue of in our air, water, and land. So we are talking about here the industrial revolution that has happened and what has happened to the impurities that it has created in our lands. But if you think about it, we have actually valorized, or we promote industrial or post-industrial heritage, which is also the things that are affecting our lands now. Now, this legacy of harm is seen or benignly as part of, it is celebrated, but do we want to celebrate it in the future? It's a question. We have sites in the World Heritage List that provides these industrialization. Number one, I'll name a few of them. There's this site in Burkina Faso, which is the ancient ferrous metallurgy site in Burkina Faso, but that has been the place of iron production since for 2,700 years, and that has been the remnants of that production. There is also the historic town of Guanajuato here in Mexico, which is it was a site for silver extraction in the 18th century, but it is now stopped. The site of Erzengebirge, which is the Krusenov Horf, I'm sorry if I'm reading it wrongly, or the Ore Mountains in the Czech Republic and in Germany, which was for I think from 1460, it has been continuously harvested or mined for silver, for uranium, and tin. And of course, another site that is familiar for coal is the Zollverein coal mine in Germany, in Essen, which is a historical coal mine that was now stopped production, but it is being transformed to a museum, a World Heritage Site, and we celebrate that kind of coal mining history. Now, these sites, they are sites of innovation, they are sites of industrialization, but when you think about it, many of these sites don't really talk about the health issues that have been created in the past. The environmental impacts are not really showcased, and I think more of these sites talk about let's say the triumph that has been created in these sites. But it's a question for us. Is there any, let's say, history that is being explained on the environmental impacts, the health impacts of these sites, and the communities that they face? What is also interesting is that the World Heritage List provides a more damaging area, which is the nuclear sites. There is this place in in the Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands, which is where the bombs were tried and tested in the 1940s. And that is the remnants of that atomic bombs that were tested for the Hiroshima, which is another heritage site that is created or inscribed in the list because of that damage that has happened. But what is told in that story is the atomic bombs that are in history. But when you think about it, again, the health of the communities, the damage to the land is not really discussed. So I think for us, when we want to engage on the role of heritage, we need to think about also the things that we need to discuss today, the environmental impacts. What is the story that we want to say to these post-industrial or industrialization? We should not just discuss about the economic development that has happened, but also the environmental impacts and the health. There are new terms that are developing for the Climate Heritage Network, and I think there's this working group called the Guiding Values Working Group that is developing ideas for these things. And I think terms like petrocultures. So petroculture is those remnants of the oil industry. When you think about all these places that we have gas stations, or that maybe in 100 years, if we don't have these gas stations, then these are remnants of what we have. Do we want to tell that story? There is an idea of carbonscapes as well, which are areas that we harness or extract things for coal mines and all. Again, what is the story that we want to take? I want to take this opportunity as well to tell my story of the Philippines, which we were affected by a storm 2 days ago. And I must say that the climate is the impacts of climate is something that you only feel when it happens to you. So I hope that you take that with you, and it's a tragedy, but we have to think about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. Thank you. And yeah, as you were saying, I mean, it is not theoretical, it's not just an idea. I mean, people are living this reality every day, and it's becoming more and more urgent and more impacting in people's life. So yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the testimony. I will now invite Catherine Turvey, Head of Capacity and Building from the Museum and Capacity Building at the International Council of Museum, ICOM. She will speak about the second point that we raised in the Resilient event, Nourishing Art for Transformative Change. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes. I would like to first start off by thanking all of the different culture actors who are here as part of the Climate Heritage Network. It's very much my pleasure to join this chorus of culture voices who believe in the role of culture in climate action. I am representing ICOM today. It's the International Council of Museums. We're an international civil society organization. We were founded like UNESCO in 1946, and we represent a little over 45,000 museum professionals and museums across the globe. We promote international cooperation between those museum professionals and museums. We provide training and resources, and we work in standard setting. And it's actually the standard setting side that I would like to talk about today. So maybe I would actually say my talk today is a little bit more about nourishing museums for transformative change, but we can include art in that as well. Many of you might have heard, but ICOM just recently, 1 month ago, approved a new definition of the museum. It was approved at our general conference 1 month ago in Prague, and it was the result of an unprecedented, huge consultation of all of the 45,000 members, which, as you can imagine, it's hard to get 45,000 museum professionals to agree on something. But they did, and it was because of the consultative process, the participatory process that we ran. All members were asked to provide the key terms representing what museums do, but also what museums mean for them and for their communities. So some of the terms that floated to the top were sustainable, inclusive, and diverse. So I won't read the full new definition because I know we're pressed for time, but I will focus on the one sentence that really has to do with sustainability and climate action today. So museums, open to the public, accessible, and inclusive, museums foster diversity and sustainability. So there's more to the definition, but I really wanted to focus on those key terms: accessible, sustainable, inclusive, diverse. So really our new definition represents the voices and priorities of the museum field, museum professionals across the world. And really it shows this overwhelming support, this overwhelming recognition on the part of museum professionals of the need to address sustainability in their work, and the recognition that inclusiveness, diversity, etc., are part of the core functions of a museum. They're not an add-on. So as a standard setting instrument, and here we are at Mondiacult, we are talking about UNESCO's standard setting role. This is a standard setting instrument that was brought forward by civil society voices through a participatory process. And it's our hope that policymakers will take note. So museums play many important roles in their communities. they educate with regards to climate change, but they can also act. And we know that there are a lot of museums across the globe who are addressing their own climate footprints, looking at waste, but also looking at social justice in many different areas, including restitution and repatriation. So we think that the new definition reflects these roles, and that according to our theme today, really puts forward museums as actors in nourishing imaginations for climate action. In parallel to this process, ICOM also passed a very important resolution in 2019 on integrating the Sustainable Development Goals through museums. So we continue to work on that with the help of expert working group of museum professionals who are integrating climate action and climate justice into their practices with the intention of sharing and encouraging others. So in closing, I just wanted to say that our new definition shows how committed museum professionals are to climate action and sustainability, and that we need public policies to follow and to adapt to the museums of today and tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you. That leads me actually this new definition and the key words that you were mentioning in this definition for museum: accessible, sustainable, inclusive, and diverse, leads me to the third point that we identified as gap in policy in the resilient session that we held in last March, which is about cultural rights, right? And strengthening the cultural rights perspective and cultural rights for all in policymaking. The worldviews of indigenous people and local communities that are not co-opted by prevailing notions of progress, they have the power to enrich our ability to imagine systems that are not based on the exploitation of people and nature, which is fundamental when we have to rethink how we produce, consume today. This is kind of back to basic mindsets. And it's not only in terms of way that we are producing, but as I was saying, also regarding how we consume and how we interact with nature and the environment. If we want these knowledge and visions to have the space and the opportunity to emerge in our societies, we need to ensure and guarantee the strict respect of the rights, the full rights of these communities and of, for example, indigenous people, including their cultural rights, of course, and among them the right to access and participate to cultural life and to cultural production in a free, in a full manner, without any obstacle, discrimination, or threat, and also the right to express themselves culturally, fully and freely, or the right to promote these expressions that can be produced. Adopting a cultural rights perspective and adopting a cultural right policy lens supports the expression of these alternative climate futures by guaranteeing the ability to identify with cultural community, to let them participate in cultural life and access knowledge and produce knowledge. Cultural organizations can amplify these responses by holistically supporting indigenous people, eschewing new approaches to traditional knowledge and linking culture directly to climate, gender, or social justice that are all linked together. I take advantage here to mention and quote the Charter of Rome. That is an important document that we elaborated 2 years ago through a very wide process, consultation process with a wide range of actors at UCLG, and which is a charter on the right to fully and freely participate to cultural life as a necessary right for cities and communities. The charter captures this idea very well because it builds on 5 essential cultural capabilities that I invite you to consult, that are discover, create, share, and enjoy, and protect. And in the case of climate issues, that would be discover cultural roots so that everyone can own his or her heritage, identity, and place, including one's own story, traditions, and knowledge. create our own cultural activities or practices, including ones which contribute to transform our relation to the planet, imagine new, more sustainable and greener futures, and help to tackling, mitigating or adapting to climate change. Share and exchange among communities, collective pairs, and so on, which contribute to enrich diversity and creativity for transformative solutions. Enjoy cultural and natural resources that one can be inspired, educated, and refreshed. And protect, finally, our common resources, including, of course, natural cultural resources, so that we can all benefit from them in an equal manner, now and in the future. Once again, this is a question of what we are leaving to the future generations, as it was mentioned before. And I will just finish by saying that as the UN Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights, Alexandra Chantaki, said yesterday various times, cultural rights as a human rights is not an option. They are a full responsibility, and we need to call on governments to endorse this full responsibility. And I will quote another person that's here in the room today, or was, I don't know if he's still here, John Crowley, that yesterday also said, during the two sessions, yesterday and the day before actually, where we presented a proposal for a cultural goal within the post 2030 and the future development frameworks and agendas. He said that without cultural rights, none of the goals that we have currently, or none of the goals that we will set in the future will be achieved, and we will be able to achieve them. So yeah, I would just wanted to quote this. I will now invite, I want to thank you, our panelists. First of all, Gabe and Catherine, thank you. Thank you to Mario as well. And I will now invite Barbara Wolfensberger, Director General for Culture and Media at the Dutch Ministry for Education, Culture and Science, to take the floor, because I guess she has a type of examples that will illustrate perfectly what we just discussed. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very interesting to listen to all the experts, and usually we from government are a lot more boring. But I will try my best to tell you about the standpoint of the Netherlands in this case. Well, thank you for giving me, as a representative of the Netherlands Ministry of Education, Culture and Science, the opportunity to address you today on this important topic. Allow me to echo others who spoke before me in emphasizing the importance of Mondiacult and of this specific event on culture and climate change. Time and again, we are confronted with the very serious reality that nature already shows us and scientists confirm. Climate change and environmental issues are threatening the very existence of the planet as we know it, and thereby of our own species. The voices that in the past questioned whether climate change was real or whether it was caused by our own doing have been effectively silenced by the confrontation with today's reality. There is not a single place on our planet that is not affected by the often already devastating consequences of climate change. And science has taken away all doubt that humanity plays a huge role in this cause. In the context of this important event, I would like to stress three things. First of all, in order for us to deal with the huge challenges that our actions are causing, we need to honestly question ourselves, our convictions, and our belief systems. And we must embrace science. For decades, many politicians across the globe have chosen to downplay the seriousness of existing data on climate change, biodiversity loss, the growing amount of waste, and rising inequalities on all levels. These days should be gone. We can't afford to close our eyes to reality, because the future is now, as the Global Sustainable Development Report in 2019 already concluded so decisively. Evidence-based action to combat climate change and its consequences is urgently needed. Second, let us be fully inclusive. In order for us to build a just, resilient society, we need to include all voices. And we have to guarantee the rights of all the participants in shaping our sustainable future. And third, let us start by what defines us, what binds us and inspires us, our culture. Culture is the power that challenges us, that offers new perspectives, and that brings people together to find new solutions. And then let us be wise, courageous, and bold in our actions. So how do we harness the power of culture? I have often felt that much more could be done, but now I feel that finally the tides are turning. For the first time, the current Dutch government explicitly acknowledges the importance of involving the creative and heritage sectors in finding solutions for the challenges society faces. For instance, when it comes to climate adaptation and energy transition. This means not only that we are supporting our creative sector to become more sustainable and that we are working hard to protect our heritage from the devastating consequences of climate change, it very much also means that we actively integrate arts and creativity in our policies, all with the goal to help create new, sustainable and inclusive strategies for the climate challenges that we're facing. A particular example of how my government tries to boost innovation and sustainable development is to stimulate the use of research by design. Large challenges such as the energy transition and climate adaptation are so complex that technical innovations alone are insufficient to make the right process for humanity. All stakeholders need to be involved to investigate new ways of developing policies. Designers, scientists, policymakers, artists, and the voices of citizens, all citizens. Research by design and design thinking facilitate these new approaches. Also in the context of our EU cooperation, we actively stimulate new ways of thinking to ensure that the cultural dimension is firmly rooted in our public policies as a determining factor for our chances of success in transforming our societies. Good examples are programs like Creative Europe and the new European Bauhaus. They focus on supporting culture to contribute to the European Green Deal. And we just finished 2 large consultation processes between all EU member states to investigate how heritage and culture can contribute to the SDGs. These processes produced very useful recommendations for policymakers that will hopefully inspire us all to take the urgent action that is needed. I very much invite you to consult these reports and to hold the policymakers in your countries accountable for taking the right steps. So yes, I fully agree with those voices today that urgently demand policymakers to further strengthen our cultural policies and to integrate culture in our climate policies. It is no longer about the question whether we need to engage creativity and new methodologies, such as research by design, in large transition challenges. We know and understand very well their added value. We are now on to the next step, to engage them in the best possible way so they become a self-evident part of tackling wicked problems. We are here this week to commit to take concrete action. Governments, knowledge institutions, civil society, I invite you all to join forces to reverse trends and build the just, inclusive, peaceful, and climate resilient future for our common agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the dedication from the Dutch delegation for bringing that perspective to this discussion. My name is Claire McGuire. I'm speaking from the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions. Of course, libraries are deeply involved in this work, creating spaces for climate education and public participation. But I don't want to talk about that too much right now. I would like to invite a panel to the front, and we've looked at as everyone comes up, I will give a bit of background on this panel. We've looked at the problem, we've looked at what we need to do, and now we're going to bring some different voices to the discussion to give some action items on how we can unlock the potential of culture to empower people to imagine and to realize post-carbon climate resilient futures. I know we don't have much time, but I'm going to ask for each of our panelists to share a few action items from your experience on how we can go forward and what we can do. And rather than introducing everyone, I'm going to ask you to come up and introduce yourself. So first, can I have Shannon Miller to the podium? Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I'm Shannon Miller. I'm the Director of the Office of Historic Preservation in San Antonio, Texas, and I'm also the co-chair for North America of the Climate Heritage Network. And I'm just going to speak briefly about a couple of initiatives in San Antonio related to building our circular economy and really in a way that has heritage at the center. The first is our Living Heritage Trades Academy. Studies have shown that half of traditional tradespeople are over the age of 45, which means that retirements are looming. And with that, we're losing contractors who have experience in those traditional trades. And by perpetuating those traditional trades, we allow historic building owners and stewards of those buildings to have access to affordable alternatives to the removal of important material and to the loss of those important cultural resources. We also know that historic and older buildings disproportionately provide affordable housing opportunities, and affordable housing is critical to maintaining community resilience. In a related initiative, our city council earlier just this month adopted a deconstruction ordinance, which basically requires that when a building is approved to come down, that it would have to be deconstructed rather than mechanically demolished. We think about this as an organ donor mentality. Sometimes buildings are going to go away, but when they do, we can utilize those parts and pieces to extend the life of other important cultural buildings. You know, there's so many social, economic, cultural, environmental benefits gained by choosing to remove structures in a better way. Deconstruction treats those buildings with dignity, and it also honors the inherent cultural value of the materials themselves. And it also minimizes the kind of ferocity or violence associated with the mechanical demolition of a building. And this is especially important from a heritage perspective for communities that view the loss of a building as a significant social or cultural loss. Another key aspect of our program is a material innovation center, which is really like a last stop before the landfill. So we're thinking about building materials that are destined for the landfill, but instead are diverted into affordable housing projects, into research, for utilizing existing materials to create new materials, and for training and building a green workforce and perpetuating those traditional trades that I mentioned at the beginning. Because we're short for time, I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Shannon. Can I invite Professor Gary Yvette Garcia-Mendia to the stand, please? Thank you.
I have your attention for something as silence as a stone. Nuestro objetivo es unir la política, planeta y patrimonio a través de recorrer el territorio, recuperar técnicas ancestrales, reciclar los monumentos, estimados delegados de los países parte, personalidades que nos acompañan vía remota, medios de comunicación y amigos todos. México es el ombligo de la luna y Michoacán es el alma de México. Yo represento un linaje mestizo con ancestros de varias partes del mundo. Por esta razón, somos conscientes de que pertenecemos a un territorio más amplio que solamente lo que nos determina una delimitación geográfica o política. Creemos en la búsqueda de soluciones que emergen desde nuestras responsabilidades. Resolver problemas del mundo juzgando al que está enfrente es algo parecido a tratar de lavarse la cara poniendo agua en el reflejo de nuestro espejo. Mondiacult en México revoluciona el pensamiento a favor del planeta. Señoras y señores, estamos frente a un momento histórico que acontece a nivel mundial, ante la indiscutible fragilidad del hombre y, por supuesto, de su entorno. En esta evolución necesaria, no debemos dejar al margen el análisis de los conceptos en torno al patrimonio cultural edificado. Consideramos que la herencia monumental de nuestros ancestros se vinculó durante muchos siglos a esta cosmovisión. Nuestras ciudades históricas están, por supuesto, construidas bajo una linda mirada orgánica para habitar nuestro planeta. Es por eso que proponemos vincular la gran potencia que guarda nuestro patrimonio material a favor de la salvaguarda del planeta en la que todos nosotros habitamos el día de hoy. Cambio climático y patrimonio edificado habían sido dos áreas de la ciencia que caminaban por senderos paralelos. El día de hoy debemos romper estos paradigmas anquilosados. Acciones específicas de largo alcance desde el poder gubernamental resultan básicas hoy por hoy para conservar la vida de los ecosistemas terrestres. Gestionar prácticas a favor del medio ambiente y con miras a detener el cambio climático dentro de los espacios patrimoniales requiere, a razón de lo que nosotros analizamos, tres elementos esenciales: recorrido, recuperación y reciclaje. El primero, el recorrer los territorios patrimoniales, es aprender a caminar de nuevo con nuestros dos pies, cada una de nuestras ciudades, con un sistema de movilidad para el peatón y, por supuesto, al ritmo del ser humano. Un centro histórico, como el mío, de 343 kilómetros cuadrados, empodera la traza original, donde se logra trasladar en 30 minutos con una infraestructura peatonal, calles completas a nivel de tierra, medios alternos no motorizados de desplazamiento. Esto genera zonas más seguras en el espacio público y, sobre todo, zonas más seguras para las mujeres y para los niños, que son nuestros grupos vulnerables en mi país. El segundo, recuperar técnicas constructivas ancestrales que permitan mantener estructuralmente estables nuestros monumentos, los cuales datan de centenares de años y, por supuesto, que están todavía de pie. Sabemos que la implementación de materiales naturales reduce el 37% del consumo de agua que se requiere para las construcciones. En los próximos años, compañeros, las pequeñas ciudades tendrán alrededor del 72% de las construcciones de concreto. Este material es un elemento muy complejo de reutilizar o restaurar por su desgaste, que es alrededor de 365 veces más rápido que el de la cal y la piedra de nuestros monumentos. El día de hoy, el sector de la construcción moderna es responsable del 16% del consumo mundial de agua para reducir las toneladas de concreto y producirlas. Esto resulta inaudito sabiendo que existe una invariable escasez en el recurso hídrico. Y el tercero, el reciclaje, potencializar la gran capacidad que tienen los territorios y nuestros monumentos. El reuso patrimonial, respetando, por supuesto, los valores universales excepcionales del sitio y pensando en el ser humano como un elemento del paisaje histórico. En conclusión, estos indicadores y acciones nos acercan a una visión común en donde el poder de los gobiernos, la ciencia, la gestión social deben asegurar con toda su fuerza la permanencia del ser humano en el planeta. Busquemos ciudades habitables, caminemos sus calles, hagamos uso de la ciencia de la restauración, evitemos la gentrificación, respetemos el paisaje histórico como parte del ecosistema. Lo digo fuerte y claro. Se comprueba que el patrimonio tiene una gran fortaleza de proteger el medio ambiente. Por lo tanto, es la forma más lógica de posibilitar la vida del hombre en el planeta Tierra. Muchas gracias por su escucha.
Thank you very much. Can I move ahead to Dr. Francesca Gilberto? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire, and good afternoon, everybody. Buenas tardes. Thank you very much for having me here today at this side event of Mondiacult 2022. It's a real honor. I'm Francesca Giliberto. I'm currently research fellow at the University of Leeds, where I work on a research project called Praxis, Arts and Humanities for Global Development. As part of this project, last year, I organized a global conference on heritage and our sustainable future, research, practice, policy, and impact, in partnership with the UK National Commission for UNESCO. We had 13 sessions, thematic sessions during that conference, and one session in particular focused on the intersection between heritage and climate change. It explores ways to shift the focus of heritage research and practice from simply protecting heritage to additionally considering its potential to contribute to tackling climate change and its impact, and to informing adaptation and mitigation strategies. With my very short talk today, I would like to emphasize 3 key points that emerged from that conference and which are relevant to today's discussion. First is the fact that climate change is of global concern, affecting communities worldwide and their heritage in many different ways. And in this context, communities that have made the smallest contribution to climate change, including indigenous people, are often on the front lines of its impact, as previously said by Gabriel Caballero. The second point is that communities all around the world have shown a high capacity to adapt to climate change. In this context, empathy, social cohesion, and traditional knowledge and practices are crucial aspects for the implementation of climate adaptive approaches and mitigation strategies. Third, cultural heritage conservation and management, community resilience, and climate action should be considered in a single framework, as they are strongly interrelated. And that said, I would like to conclude with some key recommendations for action in order to address these 3 important points. First is to recognize existing inequalities in the ways communities experience the impact of climate change, and use cultural heritage to promote global values and solidarity between different communities, to set global priorities, and to find collaborative solutions. Recognize the importance of traditional knowledge, practices, and nature culture approaches in heritage site management and climate action methodologies, and developed and implement heritage-based policies for tackling climate change and its impacts. Acknowledge the role played by all actors of society in maintaining and applying traditional understanding and skills, and the contribution this makes to this field. Use heritage to increase awareness among researchers, practitioners, policymakers, land managers, and local communities, especially youth, of the effects of climate change and their capacity to take positive action. Integrate climate adaptation and mitigation strategies into heritage research and methodologies, conservation approaches, and management processes. And finally, promote collaboration, exchange, and cross-sectoral efforts locally, nationally, and internationally between heritage and non-heritage institutions, universities, climate scientists, and heritage practitioners, and all other actors concerned about climate change and its impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And may I invite our final speaker in this panel to the stage, Cornelius Holtorf.
Thank you very much, Claire, and great to be here and address you today. Now, my name is Cornelius Holtorf, and I hold a UNESCO chair on heritage futures. You find these leaflets on your seats, so these explain some of what we do. Now, heritage futures, what is that? It's about the role of heritage in managing the relations between present and future societies. What sort of relations are we talking about? For example, this is about the responsibility for humanity, present and future. For example, it is about the creativity to imagine change. And it is also about courage to act for transformation. All of these relations are governed by culture, because culture is about how people make sense of the world and which values guide people in their actions every day. And that is precisely why culture is so essential for mitigating the climate crisis and also for preparing for a different world that we have to live in the future. And it is these connections between culture and addressing the climate crisis that make it so essential that it is addressed appropriately in the final declaration of this conference. And we'll hope that this will be the case. But things are not easy. There are also challenges ahead. And this is what I want to talk about now very briefly, because I talk sometimes about the climate heritage paradox. There are two issues that I think we need to resolve together. The first one is that heritage promotes continuity when actually we need change. I think we've all come through very profound experiences over the last 2 years to do with the pandemic, but also already with climate change. And then, of course, with ongoing wars and conflicts in many parts of the world. And they illustrate that we cannot continue in the way things are, but we really need to look for different setups and different ways of acting. And the second paradox is connected to that, but it means it is about heritage that needs to promote global and multilateral collaboration and not only local and national values that are always so prominent in heritage discourses in the present and also in the UNESCO context. Now, some of these connections have actually recently been addressed in a text which I read on my flight, and I want to recommend that to all of you. This is a white paper commissioned for the international co-sponsored meeting on culture, heritage, and climate change that took place in December last year. And the title is very revealing here. It's The Role of Cultural and Natural Heritage for Climate Action. Now, that also addresses this paradox, although it doesn't mention the term. And this is about climate action. So what are the solutions that we can propose in this context? And I was also asked to present a few action items here. So I've got 2 action items, what I think on the basis of what I said we need to do. And both of them are to do with capacity building, because I think that is needed. We live in a new world and we need to learn new things. Now, the first kind of capacity building that needs to take place, I believe, is for the cultural sector generally. And I think we need to integrate foresight and long-term future thinking into practice in the cultural heritage sector, much more so than before. Now, this happens to be something that is also very prominent in the report from Antonio Guterres, the United Nations General Secretary, that came about a year ago, called Our Common Agenda. There's a very strong emphasis on future thinking, and I think that is very appropriate and is linked to the issues that we're discussing in these sessions. And it's also linked to an much older but very little referred to UNESCO declaration on the responsibilities of the present generations towards future generations. And even that, I think, this is from 1997, even that has got a new actuality today as we see very specific challenges ahead of us. So this means that we need to anticipate challenges and prepare to act now through the techniques of foresight and strategic planning, and even the culture sector would benefit from that. And my second action item, and with that I will close, is that I think, and that is addressed to the cultural heritage sector and not the least to education within the sector, as also the sort of things I'm doing myself. And I think we need to get better in the heritage sector in 2 ways in particular. One is that we need to learn how to embrace change, not only conservation, because the heritage in practically all cases is actually about change. There's no heritage site that hasn't changed over the years. And you may as well tell a story about change rather than about continuity. I think that is important. And secondly, I think we need to strengthen global thinking generally, rather than national thinking or local thinking, as important as that also is. But maybe the global thinking is of particular relevance in the situation in which we live at the moment, and UNESCO is the right place to have a global agenda. Thank you very much.
Well, today we've heard from so many inspiring individuals that are working to respond to the climate emergency with and through culture. And thank you to all of our speakers. You all were wonderful. It's too bad we didn't have several hours to hear from everyone. We would also like to thank the participants in the March 2022 Resiliart debate that we co-sponsored with Culture 2030 goal. As you heard from Sarah earlier, many of the ideas that were discussed today were first debated there. We know the climate emergency calls for an ambitious vision for how cultural policy can help people imagine and realize low carbon, just, climate resilient future. And we at the Climate Heritage Network are eager to work together with all of you to unlock the power of culture to enable this transformative action. Just yesterday, we launched our ambitious work plan on our website, climateheritage.org. There are so many ways for each of us to be engaged in this work. As Mario mentioned earlier, if you're not already a member of the Climate Heritage Network, we would love to have you join us in these efforts. Thank you all for joining us today.